Okay, I have my first issue with this book, and I'm also really loving it in Shadow and Bone as well right now. On a deeper level, she is actually kind of an interesting character, and that made me kind of want to talk about the difference between fun nostalgia and not fun nostalgia. I think I figured out the reason why I could never really see the relationship between Mel and Alina. Hello everyone, and welcome to the reading vlog in which I will be rereading and doing a deep dive into Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. So I read this book for the first time when I was around 17 years old, and I really enjoyed it. But since the Netflix TV show is coming out on the 23rd of April, I really want to reread this book now as a 23-year-old to see, oh, my age is the same as the date that the show comes out. Nice, okay. And I just want to know if the story still holds up, if I like it less, or maybe I'll even enjoy it more than the first time I read it. We'll see. This reading vlog is going to contain spoilers, so watch it if you want to re-experience the Shadow and Bone story, or if you just want to know what the book is about before the show comes out and you don't want to like read the book yourself. You can just watch this video. So the story of Shadow and Bone follows a girl named Alina who lives in this Russian-inspired country of Ravka that is cleaved in two by the Shadowfold, also known as the Unsea, which is this pit of darkness where Volcra monsters live and no one knows how to get through it. There are people in this world called the Grisha who have all sorts of elemental magical abilities, and our main character Alina finds out that she is the Sun Summoner, aka the only person who can control light, and she becomes like the new hope of this world to defeat the Shadowfold. But without further ado, let's now jump back in time to about a month ago when I started reading this book. By the way, the book version that I'm reading is the Fairy Loot Special Edition. Good evening. So I've been reading in Shadow and Bone, which you already knew that because you're watching this video. You know how the whole thing of this book is that Alina turns out to be the Sun Summoner, basically the chosen one, and she's like, what? No, a normal person like me having a special magical ability? No, that can't be. It must be a mistake. I don't know why I'm giving her a British accent, but I've noticed that for some reason during like the past year especially now, I've been really craving these kind of ridiculous chosen one stories, and I used to like be kind of annoyed by it. I used to never really like those kind of characters that were just like so special, you know, everything was about them. I'm also rewatching Winx Club like the original, not Fate the Winx Saga, and I used to hate Bloom because I just really didn't like, you know, just that one character that's supposedly so much more special than everyone else. And now I'm watching it as a 23-year-old and I'm like, yes!
Oh my gosh, Bloom, she has the dragon flame, she's the chosen one!
I wish I was her. Now I'm just like, yes, give me these self-insert characters so I can feel as if I'm the main character in a magical story who turns out to have special abilities. And I'm also really loving it in Shadow and Bone as well right now. I think it's just because the horror that is right now in the past year and everything with the pandemic and all, I really crave just plain old wishful thinking stories. Also, another thing that I noticed is that I'm aging up the characters in my head. I only now notice like how weird it is that like the Darkling, he's supposedly like what, 100 or 300 years old, but he still looks like a 17 years old. I mean, I understand that if you're immortal you don't grow old, you'll never look old, but why would you look like a 17-year-old boy? Like surely you would stop aging at around 25 or 30 maybe, but you wouldn't look like a teenager. That makes no sense. In a fantasy story where the fact that they're teenagers doesn't really add a lot, so I just pretend that they're my age.
Then I went to visit my parents and it started snowing, so I really felt like I was in Rivka. However, my cat Momo did not like it.
Momo, komish. Kom. Momo. Kom.
Waar ze nu zit, ze durft niet te Momo, gaat steeds naar binnen. Dan is ze even fijn en dan wil ze weer naar buiten. Och, ze is helemaal god.
Okay, I have my first issue with this book. We're now at a point where, you know, Alina's the Sun Summoner, she's training with the Grisha, and I just gotta say, so far, there is so much focus on appearances in the story, and it is driving me nuts. Alina is constantly talking about how plain and boring looking she is, and how all the other girls are so attractive and so beautiful. Like, basically the first chapter of the book. The first chapter of the book tells you a lot about the rest of the story, and in the first chapter of the book we get a bit of an introduction to the story, but mostly we see what is going on here. This is a story about Alina, who is in love with her best friend, but he doesn't look at her at all because he has all these other girls fawning over him that are flirting with him. That's so annoying that all these girls are, you know, are taking his attention, etc., and he's not paying attention to her, and all she cares about is, oh gosh, does he even like me, etc., etc. And for the rest of the story, we're constantly get this focus on appearance, about how plain and boring she is and how gorgeous all these other women are. And the more I read, the more I notice that all of the male characters that we are supposed to like are really attractive, and then all the male characters that we see that we're clearly not supposed to like are described with traits that we are supposed to find ugly. There's a lot of fat shaming in this as well. And then all the women that we are not supposed to like are also really gorgeous, and then the only girl that we're supposed to like, Alina, she's plain and boring. The only exception to this is Genya, who's also super beautiful, but first of all, again, constant focus on this. Alina is constantly talking about how beautiful she is and how annoying it is that Genya is so beautiful because it makes her insecure. And there's even this passage where she's like surprised that Genya could possibly have a hard life as well, because she didn't know that pretty people could have hard lives as well. Ugh. Is this what we need to teach children or teens? And I understand that yes, this is a young adult book, and yes, these are the things that young adults struggle with. I know this because I didn't notice this when I first read this when I was 17. But the question is, should we perpetuate these kind of toxic ideas in teenagers just because they're relatable? And that made me kind of want to talk about like the difference between fun nostalgia and not fun nostalgia in young adult books. So let's compare this to Radio Silence, a young adult book that I absolutely love and that is very clearly written for teenagers and deals with a lot of teenage problems, like not knowing what you want to do with your life, you know, dealing with expectations, dealing with school stress, etc. When I read this, I feel nostalgic about that time of my life in like a nice way. I get kind of nostalgic about those feelings and insecurities that I had back then, and of course, as an adult, you can still have those feelings and insecurities. They were just at a height when you were a teenager. With Cheddar and Bone, like the thoughts about constantly, you know, caring about your appearance and which boys you like, I don't want to think back about that time when I worried about those things. I look back on that and think that was bad, that was not good, that I thought that way, and I don't want to be reminded of that I ever thought that way. And I also don't like seeing those ideas being perpetuated to other teenagers in books, whereas this kind of nostalgia, I'm like, yeah, this is more kind of wholesome teenage problems that I think a lot of people can relate to. This is more kind of toxic teenage insecurities, if you know what I mean. We have the character of Zoya, who is like the mean girl because she's so gorgeous, so obviously she's mean and out to take Mel, our main character's love interest. Classic girl on girl hates. I will say though, I do know that Zoya like becomes a main character in like later books in the series, so either this was always set up to be that way, or Leigh Bardugo kind of changed her mind on how she portrayed Zoya as a character. I'm just gonna continue reading. Okay, so I've just compiled a small list of things that I noticed during my reread that I want to talk about. The first thing, I noticed that the Volcra, you know, the creatures that live in the Shadowfold, they are never described we never get to know what they look like. We're just constantly told that they look creepy. The only image that I have of them is based on the illustration at the beginning of the book, but they're never actually described. So I just realized that this is probably just because the Volcra exist in the Shadowfold, where it is pitch black dark, so we can't see what they look like. Second thing I noticed is that this book is super fast paced. I didn't remember that. Like, there's constantly things happening. Like, they go to the Shadowfold, turns out she's a sun summoner, they go on their way, they get attacked by Fjerdans, and then they're with the Grisha, and there she has to train. Also, I think the Black Heretic, you know, the Darkling that created the Shadowfold, that was his name. Completely forgot about that name, but he was named the Black Heretic. And the last thing is when we find out that Bahra is an amplifier, that was like such a big hint that she was related to the Darkling. And throughout the book there are these constant, very clear hints that she's the Darkling's mother.
A few moments of Alina unlocking her powers, making out with the villain, and then getting co-blocked by Mal later.
So I just read the scene, you know, the kissing scene between Alina and the Darkling after they showed their power at like the festival. First, let me just say, I knew that I didn't like Mal, but I forgot how much of an asshole he is. He's finally back at the palace and she finally sees him for the first time, and all he is just angry at her. And I understand that, you know, you can be kind of worried for your friends that they're not being their authentic self or that they've changed or anything, but he's like straight up angry about it and just like clearly super jealous and not supportive in any way. Like, he's just mean. Is that just like a character flaw in him? Because of course characters can be flawed, that's never a problem, but it's just because, you know, we know that eventually he's the one that gets his way, you know, he ends up with Alina, he's the end game, so I don't like that. No. But anyway, back to like Alina and the Darkling. In case you've missed it, I'm a big fan. I'm a big Darklina shipper. Not because I think that they would be like a healthy relationship, but just because I find it a lot more interesting. I just find it a really interesting concept of like the main character falling in love with the villain, you know, through learning about her powers, maybe being pulled to the dark side. I think that's a really interesting storyline that this book could have gone, but didn't. I remember when I read this book for the first time, that kiss scene was like
the best thing ever.
But back then, of course, I didn't know that the Darkling would turn out to be the villain, and now I do, and it's interesting to read because you can tell that the way that he's falling in love with her is just because he's falling in love with her power and not really with her, but just the promise that she gives, like that he could use her to like change the world. And it's just very interesting. I love a good overly idealistic villain.
Oh no, the Darkling turns out to be evil and using Alina for her powers.
So we've reached the point where I'm like, are we even supposed to like Alina, or is she purposefully written to be annoying? We just had the scene where Bahra is telling her that the Darkling has like really bad intentions and that she shouldn't listen to him, and her response is like the classic response against women of like, oh, I think you're a bit crazy, maybe we should go to the infirmary, are you sure you're okay, you sound a bit ill. Anyway, however annoying Alina can be, I do want to talk a bit about her because I think that, you know, on a deeper level, she is actually kind of an interesting character. A friend pointed out something to me that I think is good to notice. You know how she's like the typical YA main character that's really boring and not good at anything and very plain and ugly, etc, etc. But with Alina, we learned that there's like a good reason for it, because she has been suppressing her powers for so long. And the act of suppressing all her powers basically made her constantly tired and made her look very sick and unhealthy and pale and ugly and all that stuff. So there is a good reason for her plain and clumsy behavior. And I think that if you think about it, like, Alina's situation is really, really sad and there's almost no good outcome. Like, basically she suppressed who she really is just because she didn't want to lose the one person that she still had I wanted to say as a family, but that's not true because he ends up being her love interest. She comes around, finally turns out to be able to free this power. She thinks that the only person she had left is now gone, has abandoned her, doesn't care about her anymore. She's swept up into this new life. There's this dude, the Darkling, who's basically giving her a place to belong, a place to really be herself because she can now use her power. He's giving her a purpose, a home. Of course she's gonna be attracted to that. Of course she wants to be in that position. Like on page 217, she's in like the frosty forest with Mal. She's thinking about her time with the Darkling, and she basically says, why don't you just admit that you wanted to belong to him, said a voice in my head. Why don't you admit that part of you still does? And I think that's the tragedy of Alina, is that either she can suppress who she is, suppress her powers to be with Mel, or she can be herself, use her powers, but then she has to be with the Darkling on the villainous side of things. And we also know from like the later books that if she, you know, wants to use her powers for good, she gets turned into this like saint-like figure that is being worshipped by all these people. That's also really sucks. So there's just nothing good for her. To her, it seems like no matter what she does, the situation will be bad anyway, and she will never fully belong anywhere. And that, to me, is a reason why I think this is just really good YA, really good young adult story, because I think that's what a lot of teens struggle with. You know, a lot of teenagers really feel like they don't belong anywhere, and a story like this very nicely complements that feeling. Alrighty, my friends. I finished it. I'm sure you're all wondering what rating I would give it now in comparison to the rating that I gave it back then. But first, I just have like a few things to discuss in the book. Okay, so where we left off. Mel and Alina are in the forest and they kiss. And it's really boring. I do stand corrected. Mel did apologize for his shitty behavior back in the palace. But still, I think I figured out the reason why I never really, well, one of the many reasons why I could never really see the relationship between Mal and Alina, and that is because he's absent for like almost the entirety of the book. We are told, not shown, that they have like this really long history, but we don't really get a lot of depth into Mel's character. But he's absent for most of the book, comes back, is an asshole, and then only in like the last 50 pages where they're like traveling through the frosty forest, which in my opinion was also kind of a boring part in the book. That's where we kind of get to see him a little bit, but that's also immediately the moment that they also kiss, and I just didn't really, I couldn't really connect to it because I feel like we just barely get to actually see the relationship between them happening on the page, except for when they're fighting. Anyway, the stag is killed. Alina is taken back to the palace as the Darkling's servant, slave, whatever. We have this moment where he finally explains to her what he actually was trying to do, because I was wondering to myself, wait, I don't even actually know what the Darkling's motive is, but it appears that he has this like really weird idealistic idea that if he just makes the Shadowfold bigger, there will be no wars anymore, because then that is like the one threat, and if the people of all the different countries are not in peace with each other, the Darkling can just threaten to destroy them. We love a delusional villain. And Alina is like,
No, what the hell are you talking about? That makes no sense.
Stop it. Get some help.
and we get the famous moment where the Darkling is like, okay, fine,
make me your villain.
can't wait to see that scene in the show. The ending is really cool. They go to the Unsea, they kill the Volcra. The Darkling kills a bunch of people by enlarging the Unsea. I really liked the ending. I thought it was super action-packed. And then we have a very sweet, bittersweet ending where Mel and Alina just kind of are traveling, don't know where to go. Mel's being unsupportive again. There is this moment where he's like, hey, maybe you should get rid of like the stag color, and Alina, rightfully so, mentions that, well, this is the only way that she could make use of her powers to actually, you know, save the world. And Mel's just like, Alina, no. And she's like, okay, we'll get rid of it. I don't understand this man. But that is the entire book. I had a good time. I don't think it's perfect. I think if I were to read this for the first time, not having any like nostalgic feelings, sentimental feelings attached to it, it's kind of difficult to guess what I would think about it because of course I do have those feelings attached to it. But I think if I were to read this for the first time, I would give it 3 stars because it was a lot of fun, but it really lacks a lot of depth. I'm especially really annoyed with Mel and the constant focus on appearances and the girl hate, etc. But, and this is also the reason I'm really excited for the show, I still think this world, the whole concept of the story, you know, the whole light versus dark, you know, we just have a nice chosen one main character who turns out to be special. Like I said, I kind of like that at the moment. This whole world with the Grisha and the Russian inspired setting, it just works really well and it's just a lot of fun. And that was all I have to say about Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. Let me know what your thoughts on the book were. If you're excited about the TV show, I am still super excited. I will link in the descriptions a few videos that I've made about the TV show. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe and you can follow me on my social media if you want to see some more extra content from me. I really hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you soon in another one. Goodbye!